When we think of the golden age of Hollywood, we imagine elegance, glamour, and the birth of cinematic legends. Stars like Clark Gable, Judy Garland, and John Wayne defined what it meant to be an icon, symbols of artistry, beauty, and timeless charisma. But beneath that golden glow was something far darker, a reality built on exclusion, stereotypes, and overt racism that shaped not only the films of that era, but also the values of the audiences who worshiped these stars. Hollywood was not just a reflection of America, it was a mirror that reinforced its prejudices. It created fantasies of a perfect world. But those worlds almost always centered on whiteness. And many of the actors who graced those screens weren't merely passive participants in that system, they helped sustain it. Today, we're peeling back that glossy veneer to reveal a disturbing truth: the 11 most racist stars of the golden age of Hollywood. This isn't about canceling the past, it's about confronting it, because understanding these legacies helps us see how deeply racism was woven into the very fabric of American entertainment. That if this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. 1. John Wayne, the American hero with a dark shadow. Let's start with the man who symbolized American patriotism itself, John Wayne. Known for his rugged masculinity and cowboy charm, Wayne became the personification of the ideal American man. But in real life, his ideals were built on white supremacy. In his infamous 1971 Playboy interview, Wayne openly declared, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated enough to take responsibility." He wasn't misquoted. He wasn't joking. He was deadly serious. Wayne defended the genocide of Native Americans, claiming they were selfishly trying to keep the land they had. His films, from Stagecoach to The Searchers, romanticized the colonization of the West while depicting indigenous people as savages or enemies. Even decades later, when Hollywood began grappling with race, Wayne doubled down. He condemned civil rights activism and supported far-right groups trying to maintain segregation. For many, he remains a hero. But for others, he is the embodiment of how America mythologized white dominance, a cowboy riding across stolen land, waving the flag of freedom he denied to others. 2. Walt Disney, the creator of dreams and stereotypes. Few names evoke as much nostalgia as Walt Disney. He built an empire on imagination, innocence, and wonder. But even Disney's Magic Kingdom was rooted in racial caricatures and segregationist attitudes. In early films like Dumbo, 1941, the crows, voiced by white actors using exaggerated black dialects, were blatant minstrel stereotypes. Song of the South, 1946, long criticized and eventually buried by Disney itself, romanticized the slave era and presented plantation life as cheerful and harmonious. Behind the scenes, Disney was accused of promoting racist hiring practices and opposing unions that included Jewish and black workers. Though Disney's defenders argue that he was a man of his time, it's undeniable that his productions helped normalize racial stereotypes for generations. His legacy remains complicated: a visionary storyteller who revolutionized art, yet one whose empire was built on stories that subtly taught audiences who belonged in the frame and who didn't. 3. Clark Gable, the gentleman who looked away. Clark Gable, the so-called king of Hollywood. Suave, handsome, and powerful. On screen, he exuded charm. Off-screen, his moral record was murkier. During the filming of Gone with the Wind, 1939, black cast members like Hattie McDaniel were segregated on set. McDaniel, who would become the first black Oscar winner, was forbidden from attending the premiere in Atlanta because of Jim Crow laws. When confronted about this injustice, Gable reportedly threatened to boycott, but in the end, he attended the event anyway. His relationship with McDaniel was friendly but distant. He never publicly used his influence to protest racial inequality in Hollywood, despite having the power to do so. Clark Gable represents a subtler form of racism. Not the loud bigotry of John Wayne, but the quiet complicity of silence. His refusal to challenge injustice, even when he could, speaks volumes about the comfortable ignorance of privilege. 4. Judy Garland, America's sweetheart and the minstrel tradition. It's hard to imagine Judy Garland, the beloved star of The Wizard of Oz, as part of this list. Her voice inspired generations, and her struggles with fame made her a symbol of vulnerability. But Garland's early career included performances in blackface, a painful reminder of how normalized racism was in 1930s Hollywood. In the film Everybody Sing, 1938, a teenage Garland performs a musical number in full minstrel makeup. While she was young and following studio direction, these performances still helped perpetuate stereotypes that dehumanized Black Americans for entertainment. Garland herself wasn't known for personal racism, but her image, controlled by MGM, contributed to an industry that used racist caricature as humor. Her story is a tragic illustration of how even innocent faces can become instruments of a much larger, uglier system. 5. Marlene Dietrich, the progressive icon with limits. Marlene Dietrich was often celebrated as a trailblazer, a defiant woman who challenged gender norms and fought Nazism. Yet, even she wasn't free from Hollywood's racist machinery. In the 1930s and 40s, Dietrich appeared in films that portrayed Asian characters through crude, Western stereotypes. In Shanghai Express, 1932, she performed in a role surrounded by Orientalist imagery, perpetuating the notion of the exotic East as mysterious and morally ambiguous. Though Dietrich was personally against Nazi racism, she still benefited from and participated in Hollywood's commodification of racial difference. Her case reminds us that progressivism in one area doesn't erase complicity in another. Even icons of rebellion were bound by the prejudices of the system that made them famous. 6. Mickey Rooney, the embodiment of stereotype. If there's one example of racism so blatant it still shocks modern audiences, it's Mickey Rooney's portrayal of Mr. Yunioshi in Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961. Though slightly outside the golden age, it's part of the same cultural mindset. Rooney's exaggerated yellow-face performance, fake buck teeth, slanted eyes, and a screeching accent turned Asian identity into a grotesque caricature. What's worse, decades later, Rooney defended the performance, claiming audiences were too sensitive. His refusal to acknowledge the harm showed how deeply ingrained casual racism was in Hollywood's DNA. Rooney wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He was a product of a studio system that saw non-white people as props, not people. His career serves as an uncomfortable reminder of how comedy was used to mask cruelty. 7. Katharine Hepburn, the intellectual who looked the other way. Katharine Hepburn was known for her intelligence, independence, and sharp wit, a woman ahead of her time in many respects. But her career, too, was marked by roles that reinforced racist imagery. In Dragon Seed, 1944, Hepburn portrayed a Chinese woman, wearing heavy yellow-face makeup and speaking in broken English. The film, though intended as an anti-Japanese wartime message, still relied on caricature rather than authenticity. Hepburn rarely spoke about race publicly, and her silence on racial issues contrasted sharply with her outspokenness on women's rights. Her story highlights a recurring theme of the Golden Age: selective morality. Stars who fought for their own liberation often ignored the struggles of others when it didn't affect them personally. 8. Spencer Tracy, the complex liberal. Spencer Tracy was often seen as one of Hollywood's moral compasses, thoughtful, serious, and principled. But even he wasn't immune to prejudice. Tracy reportedly objected to working closely with black actors early in his career and supported segregated spaces within Hollywood's elite clubs. Ironically, he later appeared in films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, which tackled interracial marriage. Though critics note that the film framed racism as a personal problem, not a systemic one. Tracy's evolution mirrored America's, moving from open prejudice to a kind of performative liberalism. His legacy is both admirable and troubling, showing how social progress in Hollywood often came from the same people who once upheld its prejudices. 9. Shirley Temple, the child star and cultural innocence. Shirley Temple was America's sweetheart, a symbol of joy during the Great Depression. But Even her films reflected racial insensitivity. In The Littlest Rebel 1935 and The Little Colonel 1935, Temple performed alongside black actor Bilbo Jangles Robinson. Their famous staircase dance was groundbreaking, a white girl and a black man dancing together on screen. But the films themselves reinforced plantation nostalgia and subservient roles for black characters. Temple was too young to understand these dynamics, but the studios that packaged her image knew exactly what they were doing. They sold a sanitized vision of the South, where slavery's brutality was erased and replaced with sentimental affection. While Temple later supported civil rights, her early roles remain reminders that even innocence can be weaponized by propaganda. 10. Henry Fonda, the progressive with blind spots. Henry Fonda is often remembered as Hollywood's conscience, a man of quiet integrity, the face of justice in films like The Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men. Yet, like many of his contemporaries, his progressivism had boundaries. Fonda rarely spoke about race, even as his studio profited from segregated practices. He socialized in elite circles that excluded minorities and reportedly objected to sharing dressing rooms with non-white performers. His silence wasn't as loud as John Wayne's bigotry, but it was still a choice, one that reflected how good men of the era maintained comfort over confrontation. In some ways, Fonda's story is the story of America itself, well-intentioned, self-righteous, and blind to its own hypocrisy. 11. Bing Crosby, the crooner of whiteness. Bing Crosby's warm baritone defined American pop culture for decades. But behind that smooth voice was a man whose success came partly from performing within and benefiting from racial exclusion. Crosby's collaborations with Louis Armstrong were often framed as examples of racial harmony. But historians point out that Crosby enjoyed privileges Armstrong never could: higher pay, more screen time, and control over creative direction. In Holiday, in 1942, Crosby performed Abraham in blackface, celebrating Lincoln's birthday with minstrel imagery. While some dismissed it as period entertainment, the scene helped normalize blackface for mainstream audiences. Crosby's career wasn't marked by overt racism, but by quiet acceptance of a system that kept black performers secondary. His smile, his charm, they were part of Hollywood's myth that everything was fine as long as you weren't looking too closely. When we talk about the golden age of Hollywood, we often do so with nostalgia. We remember the sparkle of the gowns, the elegance of the stars, the timeless magic of black and white cinema. But nostalgia can be dangerous. It softens the past. It turns cruelty into charm. These stars weren't monsters, they were products of a society that rewarded prejudice and punished empathy. Yet acknowledging that doesn't absolve them. It challenges us to be honest about how culture shapes morality. Racism wasn't a footnote in Hollywood history, it was the foundation. It dictated who got to be a hero, who played the villain, and who didn't get to be seen at all. The goal of revisiting these stories isn't to erase their art, but to understand it. To recognize that every reel of film from that era is both a work of beauty and a record of exclusion. Because only when we face that truth can we begin to rewrite the script, one where talent, creativity, and humanity are not measured by the color of person's skin, but by the depth of their soul.